The views expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution which any panel member is associated. Reproduction or dissemination, other than for the purpose of education or information without the express written permission of the Phoenix Research Institute or Nova Society Media, is strictly prohibited.
So welcome everyone to the Nova Society. I'm your host, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and I'm here with the panel. Dr. Mark Bound and Dr. Scott Gershwer, your favorites. And Mark, please go right ahead.
All right, so I received this in my direct email. This is from a dear friend of mine, Spencer. I have great respect for him, very, very good young man, and I have respect for the things he talks about. So, but you will probably not find two more diametrically different, politically opposing people than me and Spencer, but you know what? We don't let that impact our friendship. And Spencer has some questions about pardons. And I did promise Spencer, him being a lawyer, that I would read these verbatim to how he has them put down here. What is your opinion of Biden pardoning Milley, Fauci, January 6 members and witnesses, and then various members of his family? This announcement on his family coming while they were in the rotunda for the ceremony. What is your opinion of Trump pardoning almost all January 6 defendants? In light of these two actions, do you think there should be discussion about altering the presidential pardon power? That's question number one. What do you think? What do we think about Biden doing all those pardons?
I've already said, but when Biden pardoned Hunter, that I just don't understand the mindset of the pardon power being given to them. It's the thing that I like least about the presidency, and it's supposed to be for Leonard Peltier. Okay, got pardoned yesterday by Biden, or 2 days ago by Biden. That is what the pardon is for. This guy has been in prison now for, I think, 40 years for a crime he may not have committed. The trial that he had, it's possible that the FBI at that time bribed American Indians to testify against him. And there are question marks about it one way or another. He's been in prison for 40 years. He's elderly now, in his 70s, I think, and not particularly healthy. And the pardon power is a bit of mercy that I think is understandable. None of the other pardons, whether they're preemptive, which I mean, I get, given the fact that Trump, if you believe everything that Trump says, and I think we should, because he means it when he says it, that he's going to prosecute these people. I mean, Milley, for example, his portrait, official portrait, has already been removed from the Pentagon. So, there's this idea that Trump can change reality and disappear people from the record is something that he's trying to do, and he will prosecute, or at least, prosecute these people and force them to defend themselves in court, which is enormously expensive and life-altering. And, I have zero sympathy for John Bolton, for example. Zero sympathy. That guy has never met a war he didn't want to start. But you would be crazy to follow in John Bolton's footsteps by being the national security advisor, because a president of the United States has decided that he doesn't like your politics because they're anti-his, and he's taking your security away from you when there are death threats against you. I mean, that's a great way to intimidate people out of dissent and out of serving in government. So I am totally against the pardon power for the president. I think it's something that should be done away with immediately. It's not going to be, obviously. No president is ever going to sign that into law. So it's not going to happen any more than the Electoral College or any of the other stuff that we don't like. But yeah, I'm not for it at all on either side.
And I totally agree. I am not for it. I disagree with Biden pardoning Hunter Biden. I think that was wrong. You let the process play out. And I we talked about this before, and we were talking about, because if you try to look up about presidential pardon powers and the discussion that was had, you don't really see very much of anything in the Federalist Papers, which is a great read if you're a policy or a constitutional wonk. That's where you want to go. There's also very little literature out there about it, at least so I thought. The presidential pardon powers were actually debated in the legislature of Virginia when they were looking to support the new Constitution. And there was a lot of opposition to this idea of pardoning. And the person, surprisingly enough, who was the greatest advocate was James Madison. James Madison was a huge proponent of it. And his idea was that even though the president, there are limitations. That's something else that when we look at the presidential powers, there are limitations to it. He can't pardon people that are convicted of treason. Can't do that. Or somebody that's aided and embedded the enemy against the United States. Cannot do that. I think that's going to be a question that's going to be asked when we start talking about these pardons for these January 6th rioters. I think that's going to that might come up. And I think that's going to be an important point that we're going to be looking at here, whether or not are we going to consider this, is this an act of treason? We may have to come up with a new definition of what treason is. But James Madison really argued that the other two branches of government were going to constrain the president. What he did not understand, and again, you have to look back at the time. We're talking about the late 18th century in the United States. There weren't just two parties. There were five. So it started out almost looking like a parliamentarian system with a little bit of different, nuances to it, like speaker, those kind of things. Remember, we still call it the Speaker of the House. That's what the British call it in Parliament. So that's why we have a Senate, which is sort of like the House of Lords. We just named it a little different. But some of the powers, and again, the Senate of the United States, their function is to advise and consent. That is what the House of Lords is supposed to be for. So there was a lot of correlation. Yes, the Founding Fathers did a great job in creating a new form of government. However, they took an awful lot from the old form of government that they all understood. And pardoning powers really came from the idea of a monarchy. That's what a monarch could do. He could pardon anybody he wanted. And I think that's why this was put in. And Madison was adamant about keeping the pardon powers in. The idea of Mark Milley pardoning him, I understand the question. My great fear isn't the fact that he did it. That is not really my complaint. It's the fact that someone believes he had to do it. Fauci. Fauci is really almost unexplainable why you would think you have to protect the man that in many ways saved thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives, tirelessly worked with those organizations during COVID. Why would you think you have to protect Fauci? Maybe it's because somebody's got that conspiracy theory out there that Fauci created it. Well,
clearly you don't read Twitter.
I don't read Twitter. I try to stay off it. But again, we're talking about any reasonable person would know that he didn't create this. Him and the Chinese did not get in a room and say, hey, let's create this and screw things up. That did not happen. And to believe you've got to pardon Fauci for this, it's amazing.
I mean, protecting people from unfair prosecutions seems to be the theme of that whole thing. Milley contacted his counterpart in China and said, look, you may hear some things. Trust me, we're not going to war with you. Before you react, talk to me. And that can be interpreted as something awful close to treason. It can't be treason because we're not at war with China, but that's a That's a real ballsy thing to do, if nothing else, to go around the commander in chief and talk to the enemy and say, you may hear some serious saber rattling, but don't worry about it. We're not, we're bluffing, or we're not actually gonna follow through. He's declared war on a lot of countries. He's asked us to shoot missiles at a lot of people, including Mexico and stuff, and we're not gonna do it. So don't overreact to it when you hear it. I agree with him, right? Who knows what Trump was willing to do at the end of that last administration of his. He was absolutely insane, but it is a ballsy thing to do.
Well, and I would make the point that if Milley had talked to Xi Jinping, because you made the point, Scott, this was his counterpart. Trump is not going to talk to his counterpart. That's a step down. Trump's going to talk to Xi Jinping. Now, if Milley had called Xi Jinping and said, now I think there's a better argument of, wait a minute, that's overstepping the line. Talking to the head of the military of China is part of his function, because the president isn't going to. So when we say the commander in chief, yeah, okay, great. But Trump isn't calling individual generals or individual heads of militaries. He's calling heads of state. So I don't think that this was too, unusual or off the wall, simply because that's who he would be talking to. But as I say, if he had talked to Xi Jinping, now we have a different story to talk about. But I mean, the members of the January 6th committee, how can you, the idea, and again, it always comes down to me, the belief of why you thought you had to do this. And I know that there's a lot of trouble with him pardoning his family. I get that as well. And I have a problem with it. I have a problem with all of the presidential pardoning powers. I don't think it should exist. But his family, other than Hunter Biden, has not been convicted in a court of law of anything. As opposed to the January 6th people that attacked the Capitol, they have been convicted. They've been convicted in a court of law. So if you're going to try to compare those two things together, to me, that's apples and oranges. You've got a bunch of convicted people that Trump pardoned, and you've got a people that are not convicted of anything. Yes, there's conspiracy theories and all this, but nothing's been brought to a court of law. Nothing's been proved. So no, I just don't see that being.
James Comer said that he was going to go after them, and that's probably what prompted this and why it was such a late in the game pardon. Sure. Because Comer was on TV the other day and said that they're making criminal referrals to the DOJ, which is now going to be as weaponized as they claimed it was before. So to try to prevent, I don't know if it's going to work, even his family from being hassled into poverty, he offered these pardons to them.
Right.
Look, I mean, again, you want to talk about pardons, man, you got to talk about Jamie Davidson. Pardon on the last day of Trump's first administration, a guy who handed a young man a gun and said, you kill that guy when he comes here. And the guy was an undercover cop, and he's serving life without chance of parole. And Trump pardoned him or commuted his sentence as a favor to the guy's lawyer, who is a friend of his children's.
Yeah.
I mean, that is not what pardon power is for. First of all, he's letting a cop killer go on the streets. But second, it's not supposed to be a personal favor that you're doing people, even members of your family. And that was a sick thing. And this other one with Ross Ulbricht yesterday is just mind blowing. I'd never heard of the guy before. I'd never heard of Silk Road before. But what goes on the dark web is really scary stuff. And this guy is incredibly wealthy because he was taking 30% of whatever was being spent on there. And what was being spent was something along the lines of $1.3 billion. So he's a really wealthy man. Trump either did it, if you believe him, as a payback for the Libertarian Party supporting him, or he did it because he got bribed to do it, which, again, seems to be like done in open now. is no longer like bags of cash being handed to Spiro Agnew in the White House parking lot. This is like open corruption where, I'm going to do this for you if you pay me money, and here's how you do it. I have a
Yep.
crypto coin, you buy into that, whatever it is. And he's already become, he's worth $6 billion more today than he was on Saturday.
Yep. Yep. All right. So our second question coming from Spencer is, what do you make of the fact that Hunter Biden, Millie, Fauci, and other Biden family members' pardons cover a period from January 1st, 2014 to present for any crimes they committed against the United States? Is that a random date? Do you believe that that is a random date, or do you see some significance to it? Do you view these pardons as an admission of guilt of any kind or just a justifiable response to Trump?
So I don't understand the date other than the fact that when it comes to Hunter Biden, 2014 was roughly the time when the head of Burisma had to run from Ukraine, Zlachowski, I think his name was, and that 2 years later, when the company was trying to rehabilitate their image, they hired Hunter Biden along with Kofor Black and some other people, the former president of Poland, to serve on their board to try to rehabilitate the post Zlovjovsky. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, I know.
Burisma, So there was no corruption at that time. That at least nobody has proved it. The guy who Comer had as his secret witness, the one that kept disappearing and all that, is now serving 6 months in jail, I believe, or something like that, having been convicted of perjury or lying to the FBI or something like that. So he's no longer a viable witness for Comer. But they're going to harass these people, and I don't honestly know what significance there is in the date. It predates, obviously, Trump becoming president. And I hadn't seen that it was the same date for everybody also. But if it's the same date for everybody, then it seems like he just took a 10-year period of time and made it 10 years. Right.
Yeah, I would agree. If there's a meaning in the date, it probably has something to do with Hunter Biden. Mark Milley was in 2014. I do not believe was the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Fauci, this was well before the COVID epidemic, so I can't see any tie in there.
Although Fauci was in government going back to Reagan.
Oh, well, yeah.
Working at the NIH. So if they wanted to prosecute him on what he did with AIDS, for example, or Lyme disease or something like that, they could go back to the 80s with Fauci to go after him for stuff like that.
Sure.
Yeah. I think it was just a 10-year period, and he was only doing it through 2024, not 2025. So it was a 10-year period.
So yeah, I would
that's
say
my best guess.
Yeah, I would say that it's a random date, except as it may relates to Hunter Biden or some of the Biden family, but that's information that we do not have. As far as Milley and Fauci, I can't see where that date has any significance. Do you view these pardons as admissions of guilt of any kind, or just a justifiable response to Trump?
No, as far as I can see, nobody asked for these pardons. He offered them.
Yep.
With nobody asking for them. So this is not the same as, again, at the end of the first Trump administration, where people like Navarro and people like Mark Meadows and Rudy Giuliani were asking for pardons, which, by the way, they didn't get from Trump. And, so I forget who it was exactly, but I think it might have been Eastman, said, if there's a pardon list, I'd like to be on it.
Right.
Because he knew he was doing something illegal.
Right. And so I would agree completely with that. That I don't think it's an admission of guilt. I think if you ask for a pardon, you've done something. and
Right.
that's why you're asking for it. But none of these pardons. I know Mark Milley didn't ask for it. Fauci didn't ask for it. This was just to protect them. So yeah, this is what is it justifiable response to Trump? I think is the question, and I'm going to take it to my friend who is an attorney using the word justifiable. All depends on your description of justifiable. If you believe that Trump is going to do what he says he's going to do, if that is your position, and you take him at his word in everything he says, then my comment is yes, then it would be justifiable. If you think that, this was just him shooting stuff out there, then probably it isn't justifiable. But in the same breath, people say, "Oh, what Trump says is God's law, and it's going to come and come to fruition." So again, this is to me all depends on your definition of justifiable. And if you're a Trump supporter and you truly believe that everything Trump says is legitimate and he's going to do because he can fix everything, then maybe this would be then a justifiable response to Trump's statements. Yeah, bro.
Yeah, well, I also think another question is if we Americans had a President Harris, would any of these pardons have been issued? And my answer to that would be no. I don't see that Biden would have issued any pardons to anybody, including Hunter. I think he would have let the unweaponized justice system play out. The case would have gone forward as it did when he himself was president. He did not interfere at all, and they had the same prosecutor as special investigator or whatever it was, special prosecutor, and the process was continuing. And so I don't even know if Hunter would have been pardoned at all under a President Harris, and I don't.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. There
I don't
probably
think
wouldn't have been much of a
anybody
need
else
for
would
it.
have been either. So
I think Biden would have pardoned him anyway.
under President Harris. I don't think maybe, but I don't think anybody else would have been. So those were responses to Trump.
No, I think Hunter Biden would have, because I think that Biden was rather hurt by the fact that they took him off the ticket, and this was something that he could do. And let's face it, I'm on my way out, so I'm going to do it. But no, I don't see Harris doing this. One of the ones that surprises me is not on this list, and I don't know if he is or is not, is Jack Smith. I'm very surprised that Jack Smith is not on. Now, it may have to do with some sort of immunity as having been a special prosecutor. I'm not sure, but he is not on this list, and I would have expected. So my answer to that question is, and I think both of Scott and I both agree, pardoning power should be done away with, plain and simple. There really is no justification to it. If it's not done away with, there should only be very, very special circumstances in which it's done. And it should never be done for political reasons. It should be done for reasons of justice. But let's remember, every governor in every state has the same power.
And by the way, Rachel Vindman is complaining that her husband didn't get a pardon. Her husband,
really?
His twin brother, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
the Vindmans.
And so we'll see. We'll see how that plays out. But that would be, and again, I would say the word justifiable would be the thing that I would have to ask. What exactly do you mean by justifiable? And that would depend on the mindset you have of whether Trump tells the truth and will follow through on what he says. Okay, so the Nova Society is a production of Nova Society Media, a division of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our production partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing partners, Apple iTunes, the largest source of podcasts and music on the internet, Spotify, the most popular platform for the Nova Society, and iHeartRadio, your source for all things music and podcasting. The Nova Society is available on all of these and other quality platforms listed in our description. We'd also like to thank all of our listeners. Without your support, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a question or a comment, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. So for Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, Dr. Priscilla Hobbs, Dr. Scott Gershwer, and all of us here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Remember, the true power in society is knowledge. Thanks for listening, and we will see you again next time. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this episode, BH Conflict Resolution Services, a full-service dispute resolution firm offering expert and cost-effective mediation services to couples, groups, and businesses. BHCRS can be reached at www.bhcrs.com.